I bet you think we're in the story corner, don't you? But do you know where we really are? We're in a very strange land, far across the ocean. In fact, we're in a green forest. And in the forest is a home, a very lovely cottage, where a little girl and her mother and father live. Now, I'm not going to tell you the little girl's name yet. I want to see if you can figure out who it is. Because her grandmother, who loved her very much, sent her a lovely red cape with a hood on it. And she used to wear it whenever she went to visit her grandmother. In fact, she loved that cape and that hood so very much that she wore it almost all the time. And that is how she got her name. Do you know what it is? Right. It's Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother called her and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, Grandmother isn't feeling very well. I want you to take a nice bowl of chicken soup to her and some candy. Would you do that for Mother?" And Little Red Riding Hood, who loved her grandmother very much because she was so very kind to her, said, "Oh, yes, Mother, I'll be very happy to take Grandmother the bowl of soup and the box of candy." So she put them both in a little wicker basket, put them on her arm, put her cape on and her hood up, and she started off into the woods. And oh, it was such a beautiful day. The sun was out and the trees were green. It was such a wonderful day. You know, the kind that we like to see every so often. And she skipped along, and she was singing a little song to herself. And just then, as she neared a big green bush, a bushy tail stuck out. And Little Red Riding Hood looked at it, and she thought, "My, what a very big bushy tail that is. I wondered to whom that belongs." So she skipped over, and she gave it a little chug. She thought maybe it was her friend Elmer the squirrel. But you know who it really was? You're right. It was the big, bad wolf. And oh, look at him, with that big red vest and his tongue hanging out. But Little Red Riding Hood, who loved and liked everyone, and everyone liked her, said, "Good morning, Mr. Wolf, how are you today?" And he looked down at Little Red Riding Hood, and his tongue came out, and he smiled his nasty smile, and he said, "Good morning to you, Little Red Riding Hood. How are you today?" And Little Red Riding Hood said, "Why, I'm very, very fine, thank you. I'm on my way to see my grandmother. I have a box of chocolates for her and a bowl of homemade chicken soup." And he said, "Oh, that's very nice of you to take that to your grandmother. Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" And she said, "Oh, she lives up on the top of the hill, just the other side of those 3 tall oak trees." And the wolf thought for a moment, and he thought, and do you know what he was thinking? He wasn't thinking very good thoughts. He was thinking how he could get Little Red Riding Hood out of the way so he could beat her to her grandmother's home. So he said, "Little Red Riding Hood, do you see all those beautiful flowers growing on that hill? Why don't you pick a bunch of them for Grandmother? She would love them." And oh, Little Red Riding Hood was so happy, and she said, "That's a wonderful idea, Mr. Wolf. I'm going to do that." And she went up to the top of the hill, picking the flowers. And as she picked one, she saw another one a little further on that looked, oh, almost so much more beautiful. And she picked that one, and she'd pick, and she wasted almost 10 whole minutes picking the flowers. And then she decided she had better hurry and go to Grandmother's house before the soup got very cold and the candies were spoiled. So she marched down to the open road again and started off the house. Well, in the meantime, the nasty wolf went through and knocked at the door. And poor Grandmother, who was so very sick, couldn't get out of bed to answer, and said, "Who's there?" And the wolf said, "It's Little Red Riding Hood."
The latch is open, Little Red Riding Hood. Why don't you open the door and come in?
So the wolf opened the latch, pushed open the door. He went over and he grabbed Grandmother by her nightshirt, and her cap fell off, and he threw her into a big closet and closed the door. And he put on the nightcap, and he put on another nightie, and he climbed into bed, and he hid himself under the blankets. Well, at that moment, there was another little knock at the door. It was Little Red Riding Hood.
Hello, Grandmother. It's Little Red Riding Hood.
And the wolf, who was now Grandmother, said, "Come in, Little Red Riding Hood, come in." And she went over to the bed and she looked at her grandmother. And she thought for a moment, "Oh, Grandmother, what very big paws you have. What are they for?" "Better to hold you with, my dear." And then she said, "But what big eyes you have, Grandmother." "Ah, better to see you with, my dear." "Oh, but what big teeth you have, Grandmother." "The better to eat you with, Grandma, Little Red Riding Hood." And she grabbed Little Red Riding Hood and was just about to eat her up when Little Red Riding Hood ran out the door, and that very moment, guess who was standing there? Yes, the friendly woodsman. And he chased the woods away, the terrible wolf out of the woods, and Little Red Riding Hood laughed and laughed, and she said just what I'm going to say now. "Goodbye. Come back again."
Otto the Auto appeared under the courtesy of the Erie County Department of Public Safety. Mr. Whatnot was produced for the Buffalo Public Schools by WNED-TV, Buffalo, New York.